Hello and welcome to Dialogue. COVID-19 has changed international travel as we know it. The global tourism industry is taking a hit, so is trade and commerce. In response, some countries, including China, are considering vaccine passports to help resume international travel in a fast and safe manner. Can vaccine passports guarantee safe travels? What information should the vaccine passport entail? Might this create more problems than it solves? Joining me via satellite today to discuss all these issues from Shanghai is Wang Dan, Chief Economist at Hang Seng Bank in China. Also Professor Jove Toker from American Graduate School in Paris. On Skype, we have Dr. Mary Stephen from Brazzaville. She's a technical officer at the World Health Organization's Regional Africa Office. And later on, we'll be joining in Seoul with Dr. Jerome Kim, Director General of the International Vaccine Institute. That is our topic. I'm Wang Guan. Hi, Dan, let me go to you first. In Shanghai, should countries issue vaccine passports? Is this a viable option in your opinion?
I think it is a quick solution if a country wants to get its economy back on track. And I can totally understand the desperation of especially European countries that want to get people and the economy going since they're so tourism dependent. And also, if you look at the psychic of many countries' people, it has become at this stage that people are dying to get out. I think in a way this would help with the global recovery, although it has a lot of limitations.
Jove, speaking from the perspective of European there, what do you think? Should there be a vaccine passport of some sort?
There should be something. There should be a device or a document or an electronic pulse type thing which will enable quick, efficient controls as borders are being crossed and as people travel. Now, which exact form would this document or device or technological machine type thing will have, we still don't know. We can also count on perhaps things we still have not invented and may invent. Perhaps there would be a way of checking on COVID virus presence over a 30-second procedure, which could be applied, say, at the airports or train stations just immediately. But something will be needed, I believe.
Well, Mary, what do you think? A vaccination rate is still uneven around the world. If you look at Africa, in many countries there, a vaccination rate is very low. Do you think issuing vaccine passports at this point is a feasible option?
Thank you for having me. So if you remember in January, the COVID-19 Emergency Committee for IHR recommended that at this time, countries should not require vaccine certificate or what they call vaccine passports now for international travel, and then asked WHO to come up with a position paper looking at the scientific, legal, and ethical evidence in relation to the international health regulations. And this position paper has come out, and the WHO recommends that countries should not introduce vaccine requirements for international travel at this time for reasons that we still have critical unknowns about the vaccination, the issue of the efficacy of the vaccination in interrupting transmission, the issue of availability of the vaccine itself, especially in countries like Africa, because of this inequity in the distribution of the vaccine, the duration of immunity that the vaccine confers. So because of all these reasons, the use of vaccine evidence for travel is not recommended at the moment.
Well, Jove, isn't that the case? Of course, many countries in Europe are dying to travel, and this might be a viable option for parts of Europe. But if you think about First of all, the vaccine efficacy rate around the world that is uneven, the vaccination rate that is uneven around the world. Do you really think countries should go ahead with it?
It is the case. It is indeed several cases. Yes, of course. And indeed, you're right. There are disparities which characterize the difference between, say, Europe, Africa, South America, some parts of Asia. And there are differences which make a difference, if I may say so, say within regions, within Europe. You know that right now the geographically relatively not so distant borders within, say, the European Union do not go through similar procedures. If you want to cross the border from France to Germany, you're not exactly into the same procedure than if you want to cross the border between France and Switzerland. And they're all distant 100 kilometers perhaps one from the other. So the variety of administrative and technological and formal procedures is enormous, and for reason. But part of these reasons are because there are so many things we still do not know, and the level of uncertainties is such that, you know, every government is taking a common but mainly also nationalistically based set of decisions which do not make things more efficient, but as we will unfortunately, I believe, have to live with the virus one way or the other for a prolonged period of time, then I believe that the efficiency in those administrative and technologically inspired measures would become greater.
Don, do you agree that, you know, we may have to live with this virus, like it or not, for you know, the foreseeable future? So there has to be some sort of travel document, vaccine passport of some sort.
I'm not sure if that's entirely necessary, because if you look at the countries in the world now, probably people from China are the safest, since we've got the virus under control a long time ago. But that is exactly why Chinese people are not so eager to get vaccinated. So if you look at the vaccination rate across the world, China is a little bit behind. But it doesn't mean that other countries' people, like those from the US or European, can travel or should travel more freely than Chinese people. And does it also mean they can just skip quarantines or lockdowns? And I don't think so either. Since there is no scientific evidence that this kind of vaccination can prevent transmission of the disease, the virus itself also has mutations. So with all those unknowns, I think it's sort of premature to have this kind of travel document, and it will increase the transaction cost for traveling by a lot. I don't think it will be politically popular, and I don't think it's feasible economically.
Yeah, those are valid points. Mary, let me go back to you. Chinese CDC Director Gao Fu has previously warned that the coronavirus is likely to exist in our societies for a long time to come. If that is the case, is the introduction of vaccine certificates or passports an inevitability?
So for this COVID-19, yes, we don't know when it is going to end. And secondly, because of the availability of the vaccine, we don't know at what particular time, especially for countries in Africa, we'll get to that level of achieving herd immunity. So now, the issue of vaccine certificate, we have talked about it, is not currently recommended because of the issues I've mentioned earlier. But there are other preventive measures that we can use. People are currently traveling, making sure that they wear their face masks, ensuring that they are keeping their distance away around the airports, avoiding unnecessary touching of documents, and observing hand hygiene, using our sanitizers all the time. This, we know, are proven public health measures that can help reduce the risks of COVID-19 transmission. So while we are still with lots of unknowns around the vaccine, we can continue with the international travel, but making sure that travelers are observing these preventive measures.
Well, Mary, let me stay with you. So far, none of the Chinese vaccines have been approved by the European Medicines Agency or by the FDA in the United States. But millions of people are relying on Chinese vaccine, including many in Africa. So do you see, I mean, the situation being politicized and, we're talking about a vaccine passport, but should people really be paying attention to vaccines themselves at the point?
So yes, so far there are 5 vaccines approved by WHO under the emergency use listing, and of course quite a number of vaccines are still undergoing review. So with requirements under the international health regulations, any vaccine that might be used potentially as a requirement for international travel in the future, this vaccine has to be approved by WHO. The vaccine has to be of good quality and efficacy, and it has to be readily available. So going through the international health regulations. So at the moment, the only vaccine for which travelers are supposed to take under the international health regulations is yellow fever. There is no any other vaccine that we are using for international travel. So it is good to note that we still have issues, like I said earlier, with the COVID-19 vaccine. We still have a lot of unknowns. So it's better to focus on some of these preventive measures as we begin to get more evidence about the vaccine.
Right. Thanks so much, Mary. Jove, let me go back to you in Paris. I mean, if you look at the situation of COVID control around the world, it is not quite the same. I mean, some of the people are living in higher risk countries versus lower risk regions. And it's probably politically and diplomatically correct for some countries to, for example, ask a Singaporean and an American to both show a COVID passport, a COVID certificate. But in reality, America has a much higher COVID case count than that of Singapore. Do you think, should there be a vaccine passport, those passports should be requiring the same things for citizens from different countries?
I think that countries, but perhaps in a somehow later moment, the international community under one form or the other would have to make concrete decisions, pragmatic decisions, based on indeed the level of circulation of the virus in a given country or region or urban metropolitan zone on one hand, and then hopefully some of the uncertainties which characterize so many of the things we cannot answer right now will disappear, or at least be reduced. We will know to what extent vaccines in general and particular vaccines administered could bring down or make disappear the contamination factor, and for how long, and is it cut across age groups or other factors, but perhaps some of them are not yet even in sight of medicine and science, and certainly not administrative structures or political structures such as governments or consultative bodies. So there's so many things still to master before we can apply the pragmatic, efficient measures. But I come back to what I said at the very beginning. I believe that some kind of device, some kind of document, some kind of electronically centralized bank of data and some form would be needed if we want to accelerate mobility of humans mainly. I don't know whether that considers merchandise and commerce, but certainly for humans.
Right. Don, let me go back to you in Shanghai. If some sort of document is founded, is discovered and employed by countries' authorities, what will be the economic implications?
I think we will face a bigger problem of balancing out efficiency and fairness. Because let's assume this passport is issued, and then different countries will have different versions of passport, and let's assume that every country acknowledge all the passport other countries issue. But then in different countries, there are different priorities. For example, in China and many other Asian countries, the elderly are prioritized in getting vaccines. So under this new system of vaccine passport, those elderly can get out and about more, a lot more than the younger people. It just somehow feels wrong from many different level of senses. And then when it comes to employment, I think that's a bigger issue, since there can be discrimination towards those who don't get vaccinated. And many people, they don't get it for personal reasons or for body condition reasons. So if the employers start to demand this kind of vaccination, or customers start to demand, essentially the vaccination become compulsory. And I don't think that's a good idea. We haven't had any vaccinations in human history that are compulsory to everyone. And I don't think this virus of COVID-19 should be a big exception. And I think if there is a vaccine passport, it will be a brief introduction rather than a long-term thing.
Yeah, let's hope we get the pandemic under control first and foremost, and eventually. Jerome, Kim, thank you so much for joining us. And our discussion, we're talking about, the viability of getting a vaccine passport. Should that be a viable option? What is your opinion on that?
So I think that, like the other speakers, vaccine passports or certificates, vaccination certificates, are going to be necessary. But remember that a vaccination certificate is given by a country. And in order to become useful, it will have to be recognized by other countries, which will mean that there will need to be an international regime of vaccination certificates that are recognized and accepted by different countries around the world, and hopefully a set of standards that will allow people who are traveling to know that if I'm going from, say, China to the United States, that I will not be subject to quarantine if I am vaccinated, or that I might, have to take a COVID-19 test and isolate until that test comes back and is negative. But there needs to be some predictability in it, because the last thing you want is for a person to go through the process of being vaccinated, to have a certificate or an electronic certificate that is recognized and secure, and then to be subject to randomness at the end point of entry into another country. So a lot of work needs to be done. I mean, it's not just China or the United States issuing a certificate, but it's actually getting other countries around the world to recognize that certificate as being valid. And I think that's going to be the critical issue, and a very difficult one for countries to resolve.
Yeah, but Mr. Kin, you raised actually many issues. First and foremost, standards, right? Should nation states be implementing and issuing those, certificates, and should those certificates be recognized in more than just one countries, in countries other than those of your, countries that are friendly to you, or should, in your opinion, the WHO or a global organization be issuing those standards?
I think that that's exactly the problem. That a vaccination certificate could have uses other than for travel. It could be used within a country in order to, for instance, gain employment, or it could be used to be allowed to do certain things within the country. And it has a different use, though, as you're leaving your country of origin and going to a different country. And there, we've seen a lot of variation in what individual countries will require or will impose with regard to border crossings or complete isolation of the country from the outside. So a lot of these things should be worked out in advance. And my guess is that it might be easier for countries of similar belief or justice or legal systems to set something up bilaterally than it will be to develop a system that will apply immediately to everyone in the world. Although that would be the fairest way to do it. And I think that's what international organizations are worried about, that will, again, of the many things that COVID has done, it's exposed the divide between the countries that have and the countries that don't have. between people who have access to the internet and people who don't. And we don't want passports or the ability to travel to be one of them on the one hand. On the other hand, there is a lot of pressure to open up borders for business purposes and for travel and for other reasons. I mean, our work is significantly impacted by the inability to travel to other countries to, do very important work in global health. So again, I understand the issues, and I think that they're going to be complicated, and they will require that countries work together in good faith to develop these standards that are both transparent, secure, and applicable broadly across the different countries on the planet.
Yeah, I mean, talking about politicization, I mean, there has been politicization surrounding COVID last time this year when the virus first started, and then there has been politicization surrounding the issue of vaccines. Chinese vaccines are not readily recognized by many countries in the West. Do you, let me go to you first, Don. Do you fear that there could be even more politicization when some sort of vaccine certificate is, proven necessary going forward?
I think what's happening now is a good indication of what's going to happen in the future if we do get the vaccine passports. Because even now, people are arguing about what kind of vaccine produced in what country they should use. Like if a Chinese person visits the US, would it be recognized if they only get the Chinese vaccine? So eventually, I think this will become some sort of argument over national security or be used by politicians to cater to their voter base. And given that it's pretty much inevitable, I think every country is now doing some kind of vaccination diplomacy. China has committed about 1/3 of its vaccination to the Belt and Road countries. That gesture, I think, is quite significant because it just suggests that China wants to actually help other countries to be back on the recovery track as soon as possible. And if it has become a political issue, and mostly probably will happen between China and the US, I don't think it would be politically popular even within the border of US, since the world is in this together, and if countries don't participate and collaborate together, we can't get this virus under control.
Yeah. At least we'll see what's going to happen in 2 days in Alaska when the Chinese and American senior officials meet and whether or not they will touch upon the issue of vaccines and COVID control. Jove, do you share this concern about politicization when it comes to a vaccine passport of some sort?
Yes, unfortunately, I do share this concern, and I can even, unfortunately, predict or fear that things will get more nationalistic, more political on the part of different countries in different continents and the different contexts. What we've gone through over the last year is not a very good indication for to encourage optimistic prognostic, right? It will not become better. We see in terms of public opinions and political structures and politicians' positions as much panic, as much irrational elements as we unfortunately saw 3, 6, or 9 months ago. And this is not limited to Europe or to the Western world. I believe that's the case elsewhere in the world. And I don't see, before we overcome that large number of uncertainties, medical ones, sanitary ones, scientific ones, in a way which will convince the international community, and that's a very challenging situation to look for. I do not believe that policies will become more easygoing, and I do not see large level of bilateralism being shared by 200 and more countries on Earth in order to make things more rational and more fluid.
Mr. Kim, from the vantage point of view yourself as a vaccine expert, what do you identify as major problems in the vaccine distribution and inoculation currently around the world?
So I think that the other speakers have hit upon a very important point, and that is, the the ability of COVID-19 to drive us apart has been significant. On the other hand, we've made some progress towards multilateralism with COVAX. And the entry of the United States into COVAX, again, gives some hope that this international mechanism for distributing vaccine equitably around the world is a good idea and one that we should continue and expand. I think that I may differ a little bit in that, we already have international standards for vaccination. There's already a yellow fever certificate that gets put into your WHO immunization card. And in that case, we recognize vaccines that are manufactured in different regions of the world. The key here is the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization is reviewing the paperwork from Sinopharm and from Sinovac and from Gamaleya to see if these vaccines meet the standards necessary for pre-qualification. Could you use the World Health Organization approval as a mechanism to say that this vaccine, say the Sinopharm Beijing vaccine, is adequate to provide the protection that it's stated when it applied for approval from the NMPA, the National Regulatory Authority of China. So there are mechanisms in place. What we need is leadership. We can't have countries going off and doing whatever they want. We need to get together. We need to start talking about ways to begin the process of normalization. What we don't want is to be 9 months from now and start the discussion. These very important discussions need to begin now. And like the planning for vaccination, like the implementation of widespread distribution of vaccine around the world, all of these things needed to be planned in advance and prepared for. And then as we begin the rollout, maybe it needs to be we have to do pilot testing. And these are things that we routinely do for vaccination. And those are, I think, important lessons that we can learn from our lack of preparedness for the original pandemic, from our lack of preparedness for the important rollout of vaccination, from our lack of preparedness for the issues around equitable distribution. So let's learn. Let's start preparing. Let's begin discussing what the requirements will be. Let's come to some agreement on what countries will require. Let's come to some agreement on what process of verification is going to be provided that other countries will accept as a reasonable standard. So again, these are discussions that have to occur now, and they're highly technical discussions, and countries should engage.
And finally, Mr. Kim, what would you say to those who are wary and cynical about the need and the necessity of getting a vaccine, because there are a whole lot of these people out there?
There are, unfortunately. But we have a huge amount of safety and efficacy information, the idea that the vaccine prevents disease. And we are increasingly gaining information on the ability of the vaccines to work against mutants, against the circulating mutant viruses that we know of. And also that effective vaccination of populations is resulting in exactly what we want, a decrease in hospitalizations and a decrease in deaths. And that important effectiveness data is data being generated in the real world. The final part of this is, if we want to control the mutants, we're going to have to get better control over the outbreaks. And how do we do that? Vaccination, masks, and distance.
All right, points taken. Thank you so much, Jerome Kim, Wang Dan, and Jove Toker. Thank you also very much for today's discussion. And thank you, our viewers, for tuning in for Dialogue. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing.